questions or points before we continue? Yes, Rose.
Well, I'm gonna go back to the scene with the driver, the woman, and the other man.
Yes, the show driver.
To be a normal occurrence there.
Yep.
And then once it's over, it's done. Here, it would turn into road rage, or we would call everybody up. Oh, you don't know what happened to me today. Blah, blah, blah,
right.
blah, 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 blah. And it would just...
Because it's internalized. It's not internalized with the man.
There is just no...
It's somatized immediately, and then once it's done...
That's it. They let it go.
They're not introspective. It's not just that they're non-introspective. Middle Eastern, North African personalities, MENA personalities. It's they're anti-introspective. Now, what happens when we're discussing things like geopolitics with people that are living over there? We're not understanding. We're active listening, right? We're not understanding how they perceive reality. They perceive it very differently. We're confessing a Lord who, culturally, on an emotional level, psychological level, is the same as mainstream Middle Eastern culture today. Think about that. Okay. Here we go. Americans are fond of analyzing biblical events and characters from a psychological perspective. Like this story, the cleaning of the temple. Yet third world researchers caution that Western psychology is a monocultural science. It only applies to us, 20% of the world's cultures in the West. Not 80% of the rest of the world. It is so rooted, Western psychology, in Western values. What's a value? An idea bonded with an emotion. It's so rooted, Western psychology is so rooted in Western values as to be misleading and often useless for understanding other cultures. Cultural psychology helps Bible readers and interpreters to recognize the complexity of emotional experience and expression in the Middle East. It is so distinctively different that in this perspective, one meets these ancestors in the faith again, as if for the first time. In other words, what we're getting here in Bible Alive makes you go back to those stories and read them so fresh, it's like you've never really met them before. This was a horrible execution. Notice the calm on the faces of those people being executed by ISIS.
Their resignation.
Now, it's very easy to think of them as, I'm not saying they're not saints, I'm not saying they're not martyrs, but please understand also that their emotional response, where did that come from? Their upbringing. The Middle Eastern cultural emphasis on manliness is familiar to many readers in the Bible. One way to demonstrate manliness is to endure physical pain without screeching or crying, without complaining. This is exactly how Deutero-Isaiah describes the servant of Yahweh. Isaiah 53:7, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. What it's describing is manly suffering, not something cute like a sheep, in our understanding, with our values. Fathers socialized their sons in this culture towards such manliness through brutal physical discipline. Oops, that disappeared. I have to fix that later. Proverbs tells us, spare the rod and spoil the child. Spoil the boy, really. It's not for girls. I don't know what happened there. Do not withhold discipline from youths. If you beat them with the rod, they will not die. Beat them with the rod, and you will save them from Sheol, the underworld. But there is another there's another equally important way to demonstrate Mediterranean, Middle Eastern manliness. Not just the ability to take intense physical abuse without suffering. To suffer through intense physical abuse without complaining. That's one way. The other way is just as much important, mastery of language and the ability to turn a good phrase. That's another mark of a true man in the Middle East. Humor, puns, wordplays are examples of mastery of language. Insults are another display of mastery of language. In the Mediterranean world, people engage many times daily in a game of push and shove. The game relates to honor, core value of this Mediterranean culture. The pushing and shoving are attempts to besmirch the honor of the other in some effective way. Specialists give this game a technical name: challenge and riposte. A challenge can be a gift, an invitation, and often is a question. There are no neutral questions in the Middle East. And the reason why is because when you ask a question, the person who gets the question asked to may not know the answer. And therefore, he'll shame himself by showing his ignorance. The word riposte belongs to a sort of dueling and describes a sharp, swift thrust made after parrying an opponent's lunge. A lie and an insult are two very appropriate and fitting ripostes to any question in the Middle East. Telling a lie ends the exchange, but insulting the questioner ups the ante, and the game of push and shove, challenge and riposte begins again. If you understand this, you will understand 95% of all exchanges Jesus has in the Gospels, including the one in the cleansing of the temple story. Only the definitive shaming of the other ends the game. Let me illustrate this with another story of which we're superiously familiar with, the story of David and Goliath. This is a story we think we know, but maybe we don't know. Maybe we have ideas, Western ideas, and we put it into it, and we associate with our sports, which reflect our cultural values, and maybe we misunderstand the whole schmear. So let's see if we can get this story again from a Middle Eastern perspective. This familiar story of David and Goliath is one example of push and shove peppered with insults. Goliath is 9 feet tall, 9 inches, right? That's big. Quite extraordinary for that time, according to physical anthropologists. He hurls a challenge at the Israelite army to select a warrior to do battle with him one-on-one, a social equal. 1 Samuel 17:8, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why come out in battle formation? I am a Philistine. You are Saul's servants. Choose one of your men and have them come down to me," on the plain. He adds insult to underscore his challenge. In verse 10, the Philistine continued, "I defy the ranks of Israel today. Give me a man and let us fight together." Little shepherd boy David pleads with King Saul to send him into the battle. Saul points out the obvious. David, he's too young to battle, and he's not a seasoned warrior. His name is a sissy name. David means beloved, Dawid. Beloved? You're going to send beloved to fight, little cute beloved to fight Goliath? He's not equal. He's not a social equal to Goliath, and only social equals can play the game of push and shove. Furthermore, David is a shepherd, and this is a despised occupation in this culture. It would be extremely insulting to send a little shepherd boy against a seasoned warrior representing all of the Philistines. Moreover, David doesn't even come close to Goliath's height. But David defends himself as very powerful and up to the task. Maybe he's very foolish. He accounts how he has killed lions and bears defending his flocks. Besides, he argues, Yahweh is on his side. He'll make up the difference, right? It is important to remember God's place in the honor scheme of Israelites. God's reputation as a kin God of the Israelites, as Israel's patron, is always at stake whenever enemies come over to do battle with Israel. Because if Israel loses, the God of Israel gets shamed by those other gods. The gods of the enemy are perceived to be superior to Israel's kin God whenever Israel loses a war or battle. Remember, all theology is analogy, and all analogy is rooted in human experience, and all human experience is culturally specific. That's where these stories come from, folks. Saul offers his armor to David. It doesn't fit. David is weighed down by equipment to which he is unaccustomed. He approaches Goliath in his shepherd garb. Very insulting. Taking 5 smooth stones in his pouch and holding his sling in his hand. Compared with Goliath with his uniform and equipment, David looks naked. 1 Samuel 17:5-7. Goliath had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a bronze breastplate of scale armor weighing 5,000 shekels. Think about it. He has the highest technology capable of his time, the highest military equipment. Bronze greaves, and had a bronze scimitar slung from his shoulders. The shaft of his javelin was like a weaver's beam, and its iron head weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Moreover, David is too young and inexperienced to play the game of push and shove. His good looks similarly testify he's not battle-scarred. The Israelites themselves can't be sure whether or not he's female or not, but he's male. Look at the name, Dawid. It's a sissy name.
I take it that was before King David.
Yeah. Well, we're getting there. No wonder Goliath disdains David. 1 Samuel 17:42. When he sized David up and saw that he was youthful, ruddy, and handsome in appearance, he began to deride him. David should not be playing the game of push and shove. Were it not that Goliath perceives David is not his social equal, Goliath would be insulted. Goliath is not insulted because David, in his mind, cannot insult him because David is not his social equal. An inferior cannot insult a superior. Follow? Mm-hmm. So Goliath does the equivalent of trying to flick away a pesky mosquito. 1 Samuel 17:43. Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And then, of course, Americans read that and go, oh, yes, we play fetch with dogs. No. No, that's not what that means. Dogs are not pets in the Middle East. Dogs are vermin in the Middle East. Remember that gospel story we heard over Sunday? Dogs are vermin in the Middle East. You chase dogs away with sticks. Goliath asks this, and he curses David by his gods. Now, from Goliath's perspective, he's dismissing David. But if you were foolhardy, or perhaps trusting in your own God, Yahweh, you might take this as a challenge to move the game forward. And that's what David does. 1 Samuel 17:44-47. Goliath tells David, come here to me and I'll feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Which is, I know it doesn't sound like it, it's like, shoo fly, don't bother me. I'm going to squash you like a bug. Okay, now he's gone. Good. But I want you to notice something. Look at what he says. Considering that mastery of language is one way in the Middle East that you show you're a man. Come to me, I'll feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Now listen to David. David answered him, you come against me with sword and spear and scimitar, but I come against you in the name of Yahweh of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have insulted. Today Yahweh shall deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will feed your dead body and the dead bodies of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Thus the whole land shall learn that Israel has a God. All this multitude too shall learn that it is not by sword or spear that Yahweh saves, for the battle belongs to Yahweh, who shall deliver you into our hands. David's eloquent response makes Goliath's blunt challenge look tame by comparison. David is clearly a master of language. Indeed, he's already been called that back in chapter 16, verse 18 of 1 Samuel. He taunts Goliath, come at me, bro, and tells him that his weapons will not spare his life. For David intends to make of Goliath food for the birds and the beasts. Already, David has bested his opponent in one dimension of Mediterranean manliness, language. The rest of the story, anticlimactic. David rushes forward to meet Goliath. With a powerful shot from his sling, he kills Goliath like a beast, and then beheads the giant with his own sword. This shameful end for Goliath ends the game of push and shove between himself and David. Note well that the war of words in the Middle East is as important, if not more important, than actual physical combat. In the Middle East, in the Bible, honor is everything. Now let's talk about Jesus. We'll pause it right there.